The theatre lights dimmed just as Carol Hollister settled into her seat, a second-hand paperback copy of Don Quixote tucked under her arm. It was her one luxury this month, a community theatre production of Man of La Mancha, paid for, with tips she'd saved from her weekend barista job. What she didn't expect was the elegant elderly woman struggling in the aisle beside her, fumbling with her cane while balancing a program and her purse. Without hesitation, Carol jumped up, steadying the woman with gentle hands. "Please, let me help you," she offered, guiding her to the empty seat next. The woman's grateful smile crinkled her eyes, which Carol couldn't help but notice were a striking shade of amber, unusual and somehow familiar. "You're very kind, dear," the woman whispered as the overture began. "I'm Elaine Stanfield." Carol couldn't have possibly know that this simple act of kindness would catapult her into the orbit of Fresno's most eligible bachelor, a man whose gaze would soon turn her carefully ordered world completely upside down. "I'm Carol," she replied, settling back into her seat. "Carol Hollister." The theatre filled with music, but Carol found herself distracted by Miss Stanfield's elegant profile, her silver hair twisted into a classic chignon, the pearl earrings that caught the stage lights. There was something regal about her that made Carol's thrift store dress and scuffed boots feel suddenly inadequate. When intermission arrived, Carol helped Miss Stanfield to the lobby. "Are you here alone?" she asked, concerned about the older woman navigating the crowded theatre. "By herself. My son was supposed to accompany me," Elaine sighed. "But business called, as it always does. That boy works too hard. All those schools and educational programs to manage." Carol nodded sympathetically, though her mind was already calculating whether she could afford both a small coffee and the program she'd been eyeing. Her art school tuition had eaten through most of her savings, and her stepmother's constant reminders about practical career choices weren't helping. "Let me buy you a drink, dear," Elaine said, noticing Carol's longing glance toward the concession stand. "It is the least I can do after you rescued me." "Oh, that is not necessary. I insist. Besides," she added, with a twinkle in her eye, "I hate drinking alone." Over glasses of mediocre wine, Carol learned that Elaine was a former ballet dancer who now sat on several arts foundation boards. When Carol mentioned her art studies at Fresno City College, Elaine's interest sharpened. "What kind of art do you create?" "Mixed media, mostly. I love combining classical techniques with pop culture references." Carol blushed. "It probably sounds pretentious." "It sounds fascinating," Elaine corrected her. "My son has quite the art collection, though I fear he acquires pieces more for investment than appreciation." When they returned to their seats, Carol found herself wondering about this unseen son, the busy businessman who left his mother to attend the theatre alone. She pictured some middle-aged corporate type with a receding hairline and expanding waistline. The second act was drawing to a close when Elaine gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest. Carol turned, alarmed to see the woman's face had paled dramatically. "Miss Stanfield, are you all right?" "Just need my pills," Elaine whispered. Fumbling with her purse, Carol helped her locate a small pillbox, then rushed to get water while other patrons began to notice the commotion. By the time she returned, a theatre manager was hovering nervously. "Should we call an ambulance?" he asked. "No," Elaine said firmly, her color slowly returning. "I am fine now, but perhaps... Could you help me home, Carol?" "I don't think I should drive." Before Carol could answer, the manager interjected, "I've already called someone for Miss Stanfield. Her son is on his way." Carol stayed with Elaine as the theatre emptied, the older woman insisting she felt better but grateful for the company. They were among the last to leave, making their way slowly to the lobby. "There he is," Elaine said, waving toward the entrance. Carol looked up, expecting her imagined middle-aged businessman. Instead, her eyes met those of a tall, athletic man about her age. His amber eyes, identical to his mother S, widened slightly as he took in the scene, his sculptured face a perfect blend of concern and something else Carol couldn't quite identify. "Mother," he said, his voice deep and slightly accented. "What happened?" As Elaine explained, his gaze kept returning to Carol, who suddenly wished she'd worn something other than her paint-splattered jeans and oversized cardigan. "This is Carol Hollister," Elaine finally said. "She's been my guardian angel tonight." He extended his hand, and Carol noticed the expensive watch that gleamed against his brown skin. "Ayan Stanfield," he said. "Thank you for looking after my mother." His hand was warm around hers, and Carol felt a strange current run between them, like touching a Van de Graaff generator at a science museum, unexpected, electric. "Anyone would have done the same," she managed. "No," he said, holding her gaze a moment too long. "They would not have." As he helped his mother toward the exit, Elaine turned back. "Carol, dear, you must come to dinner next week. I insist." Before Carol could formulate a polite decline, Ayan looked over his shoulder. "That's an excellent idea, Mother. After all, I owe Miss Hollister a proper thank you." As they disappeared through the doors, Carol stood frozen in the empty lobby, clutching her paperback and wondering what had just happened. She hadn't even accepted the invitation, and she certainly hadn't told them where she lived. But as she walked to the bus stop, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you again for your kindness. Dinner, Friday, 7 p.m. I'll send a car. Elaine Stanfield, and Ayan, who says your copy of Don Quixote suggests excellent literary taste." Carol stared at her phone, then at the book in her hand. How had he noticed that detail in such a brief encounter? And why did the thought of seeing him again make her heart race like Nina, her pet turtle, had suddenly learned to sprint? Carol stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of her tiny bathroom, wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. The black dress, her only nice one, felt too formal, then not formal enough, then just wrong altogether. But it was too late to change again. The car Elaine had promised was due any minute. "You look fine," her father called from the living room, where he was watching a baseball game. "Oh, though I still don't understand why some rich lady is sending a car for you." Neither did Carol, honestly. The whole week had passed in a blur of classes, work shifts, and trying not to think about amber eyes that seemed to see straight through her. "It is just a thank-you dinner, Dad," she called back, applying a final touch of mascara. "Well, just remember we are not charity cases," he grumbled. Her stepmother appeared in the doorway, arms crossed over her expensive blouse, the latest in a series of purchases that was stretching their already tight budget. "You should have asked if you could bring a +1. I'd love to see how the other half lives." Carol bit back a retort. Ever since her stepmother had married her father 3 years ago, their relationship had been strained at best. The woman seemed to resent Carol's very existence, particularly her decision to study art instead of something practical like business. The doorbell rang, saving Carol from having to respond. "That'll be the car," she said, grabbing her second-hand clutch. "Don't wait up." The driver, an actual chauffeur in a proper uniform, opened the car door for her with such deference that Carol nearly looked behind her to check if someone important had appeared. The drive through Fresno in the sleek black sedan made her usual bus route seem like a journey through another dimension. When they pulled through gates and up a curved driveway, Carol's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a nice house. It was an estate. A sprawling Spanish-style mansion with manicured grounds and a fountain bubbling cheerfully in the circular drive. "Ms. Hollister," a silver-haired man greeted her at the door. I'm Jeffries. The Stanfields are waiting in the garden. This way, please. Carol followed him through the house, trying not to gawk at the soaring ceilings, the gleaming hardwood floors, the art on the walls. Was that an original Basquiat? Until they stepped through French doors onto a terrace overlooking a garden. That would make Versailles jealous. Elaine Stanfield rose from a wicker chair, arms outstretched. "Carol, dear, you look lovely." "Thank you for inviting me," Carol said, accepting the older woman's embrace. "Your home is beautiful." "It is a bit much, isn't it?" said a voice behind her. Carol turned to find Ayan Stanfield watching her, amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. Unlike their first meeting, he was casually dressed in dark jeans and a light blue button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. "I told Mother we should have met at a restaurant for your first visit. Easier to escape if we turn out to be terrible company." "Ayan," his mother scolded, but her eyes twinkled. "Dawn to scare her off before the appetizers." "I am not easily scared," Carol said, surprised by her own boldness. Ayan's smile deepened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Good to know." A young woman appeared from inside, carrying a tray of drinks. She had the same amber eyes as Ayan and Elaine, though her features were softer, more delicate. "You must be the theatre rescuer," she said, handing Carol a glass. "I am Zara, the less impressive Stanfield sibling. Don T let my brother intimidate you. He wore Superman pajamas until he was 12. "Zara," Ayan warned, but he was still smiling. "What?" "It is my duty as a sister to provide embarrassing childhood stories." Dinner was served on the terrace, a multi-course meal that made Carol grateful she'd watched enough cooking shows to identify the correct forks. The conversation flowed easier than she'd expected, with Elaine asking thoughtful questions about her art and Zara regaling them with stories from her psychology doctorate program. Ayan spoke less, but watched Carol intently, entering the conversation, primarily to ask about her influences and favorite artists. There was something disarming about his attention, focused but never predatory, as if he genuinely wanted to understand the workings of her mind. "Oh, so you were combining classical techniques with pop culture?" he asked, after she described her current project. "Like what?" "Well, my latest series juxtaposes Renaissance composition with modern consumer iconography," Carol explained, then stopped herself. "Sorry, that sounds pretentious." "It doesn't, Ayan said. "It sounds like you were trying to bridge worlds that Don and T often intersect. I'd love to see your work sometime." Carol nearly choked on her wine. The idea of this man, whose home featured museum-quality art, looking at her experimental pieces was terrifying. "Oh, I don't know." "Ayan has an excellent eye," Elaine interjected. "He curates all the art for our educational campuses." "Mother exaggerates," Ayan said. "But I just believe learning environments should inspire creativity." "My brother S being modest," Zara added. "His schools are revolutionizing education for underserved communities. The art program is just one component." Carol looked at Ayan with new interest. "You own schools?" "Educational centers," he corrected. "We're trying to create more accessible pathways to quality education." After dinner, Elaine excused herself, claiming fatigue, while Zara disappeared with a vague mention of studying. Suddenly, Carol found herself alone with Ayan. "Would you like a tour of the house?" he offered. "Or we could walk in the garden. The night-blooming jasmine is particularly fragrant this time of year." The garden seemed like the safer option, fewer opportunities to break priceless objects, so Carol nodded, following him down stone steps into the moonlit grounds. "I should thank you properly," Ayan said, as they strolled past immaculately trimmed hedges. "My mother means everything to me. When the theatre called—" "She was fine," Carol assured him. "Just a little dizzy spell. Still, it was kind of you to stay with her." He paused by a small fountain. Kindness isn't as common as it should be. There was something in his voice, a hint of past hurt perhaps, that made Carol curious. But before she could respond, he gestured to a small greenhouse tucked at the edge of the garden. "Would you like to see my sister S, pride and joy?" Inside, the air was warm and humid. Plants of all varieties crowded glass shelves and hanging pots, but what caught Carol's attention was the small pond in the center. "Turtles!" she exclaimed, delighted by the tiny creatures swimming in the clear water. Ayan looked surprised. "But you like turtles? I have one, Nina. She's 13 years old and has more personality than most people I know." His laugh was unexpected, rich and genuine. "I've never met anyone who named their turtle Nina." "She's very sophisticated for a reptile," Carol said seriously, then broke into a smile. They stood close in the warm greenhouse, the moonlight filtering through the glass ceiling, casting dappled shadows across Ayan's features. For a moment, Carol forgot their differences, forgot that he was Elaine Stanfield, millionaire educator with the Spanish mansion, and the chauffeur, and she was just Carol Hollister, art student, with the second-hand clothes and the maxed-out credit card. In that moment, they were just two people standing close enough to feel the heat between them, talking about turtles. But reality intruded when Jeffries appeared at the greenhouse door. "Sir, your 9 o'clock call with Singapore is in 5 minutes. Ayan's expression flickered with annoyance, then resignation. "Thank you, Jeffries. Please tell them I'll be there shortly." He turned to Carol. "I am sorry. International time zones are the bane of my existence." "It is fine," she said. "I should get going anyway." As they walked back to the house, Ayan asked casually, "There is a new exhibition at the Fresno Art Museum next week. Contemporary mixed media. Would you like to go? As a professional consultation, of course. I could use an artist's perspective." Carol hesitated. This felt dangerous, like stepping onto thin ice, knowing it might not hold her weight but unable to resist testing it anyway. "I'd like that," she said finally. At the front door, he took her hand, his touch sending that same electric current up her arm. "Thank you again, Carol Hollister." "For what? I didn't do anything tonight except eat your food and admire your turtles." His smile was slow, transforming his serious face. "For seeing us, my family, as people, not bank accounts." As the chauffeur drove her home, Carol leaned her head against the cool window, watching Fresno's lights blur past. She tried to remind herself that fairy tales weren't real, that Cinderella stories only happened in books and movies, not to art students with student loan debt and complicated family dynamics. But when her phone chimed with a text, her heart leapt traitorously. "The exhibition is Thursday at 7. I'll pick you up. No chauffeur this time, just me." Against her better judgment, Carol typed back. "I'll bring Nina S. regards to the turtles. See you Thursday." As she pressed send, Carol couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped onto that thin ice, and it was already cracking beneath her feet. The Fresno Art Museum was hosting a special Thursday evening reception for a new exhibition from an up-and-coming mixed-media artist. Carol had read about it in her campus newspaper, but had dismissed the idea of attending. The ticket price alone was more than her weekly grocery budget. Yet here she was, walking through the modernist glass entrance with Elaine Stanfield beside her. "Nervous?" he asked, noticing her fidgeting with the strap of her crossbody bag. "Why would I be nervous?" Carol countered, though they both knew it was a deflection. "Because you've criticized the artist's technique 3 times since we arrived, and we haven't even seen the work yet." Carol winced. Was I that obvious? Only to someone paying attention. His smile was small but genuine. "It's okay to be uncomfortable, you know. New situations usually are." The simple acknowledgement, That this was indeed new territory for them both eased something in Carol S.'s chest. Over the past week, she'd convinced herself that this wasn't a date, that he was merely being polite to the girl who Dee helped his mother, that his interest was purely professional, art consultation as he put it. But the way Dee picked her up himself, driving a surprisingly modest electric car rather than one of the luxury vehicles she glimpsed at his home, suggested otherwise, as did the way his hand kept finding the small of her back as they navigated the crowded gallery, the touchlight, but unmistakably protective. "What do you think?" Ayan asked, pausing before a large canvas featuring deconstructed comic book panels overlaid with classical architectural elements. Carol studied it, momentarily forgetting her nervousness. "It is technically impressive, but there is something—" She trailed off, not wanting to sound overly critical. "Go on," he encouraged. "It feels calculated," she admitted, "like the artist is checking boxes rather than expressing something authentic." Ayan nodded slowly. "I was thinking the same thing. It's clever, but it doesn't move me." They continued through the exhibition, falling into a rhythm, observing, exchanging impressions, challenging each other's perspectives. Carol was surprised to discover that despite his wealth and privilege, Ayan possessed a genuine appreciation for art beyond its investment value. He had a particularly good eye for the technical aspects, often noticing details she missed. "How did you learn so much about art?" she asked as they paused before a multimedia installation. "And my father," Ayan replied, his expression softening with memory. "He believed art was essential to education, that it taught people to see the world differently." He glanced at her. "He would have liked you." The simple statement, delivered so matter-of-factly, made Carol's heart stutter. "Would have? He died 10 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry," Carol said quietly. "My mom died when I was 12. Car accident." Ayan's hand found hers, fingers interlacing with a naturalness that should have been impossible for two people who barely knew each other. "It changes you, doesn't it? Losing a parent young." "Yeah," Carol agreed, "and it does." They stood like that, connected through shared loss, until a museum docent approached with champagne flutes on a tray. Ayan took two, handing one to Carol. "To seeing the world differently," he proposed. Carol clinked her glass against his. "And to the people who taught us how." As they continued through the exhibition, the initial awkwardness between them melted away, replaced by a comfortable companionship that felt both novel and strangely familiar. By the time they reached the final installation, a room where visitors could add their own contribution to a collaborative piece, Carol had almost forgotten that they came from different worlds. "Your turn," Ayan said, handing her a marker, after adding his own small drawing to the wall. Carol hesitated, then sketched a quick turtle with a crown, a royal Nina, making Ayan laugh. "Perfect," he declared. "The queen of the exhibition." And as they left the museum, the night air was cool against Carol's skin, carrying the scent of approaching rain. "Thank you for this," she said sincerely. "I've never actually been to an opening before." "Never?" Ayan seemed surprised. "Art student budget," she reminded him with a shrug. "Plus, these events can be a bit pretentious. I was going to say intimidating, but yeah, that too." Ayan checked his watch. "Are you hungry? There is a great little place around the corner. Nothing fancy, but the food is excellent." Adun. The restaurant turned out to be a small tapas bar with mismatched furniture and jazz playing softly in the background. It was crowded, but not uncomfortably so, the kind of place where no one looked twice at their casual attire. Ayan greeted the owner by name, and they were quickly led to a corner table. "You come here often?" Carol asked as they settled in. "When I can. Jorge, the owner, was one of my father's students years ago. He has created something special here." over plates of patatas bravas, grilled octopus and pan con tomate. Their conversation deepened. Carol found herself telling Ayan about her complicated relationship with her stepmother, her father's passive acceptance of the tension, and her determination to finish her degree despite their disapproval. They think art is a hobby, not a career, she explained. Every time tuition is due, it's another lecture about practical choices. What would you do if money wasn't an issue? Ayan asked, refilling her glass of sangria. And create a community art space, Carol answered without hesitation. Somewhere accessible to everyone, with both exhibition space and studios. Art shouldn't be locked behind expensive tickets and white walls. Ayan's expression grew thoughtful. Daddy, that sounds remarkably similar to what we're trying to do with our educational centers, create access where barriers exist. Exactly, Carol leaned forward, animated by the connection. Education and art are both about expanding how we see the world, right? Their discussion continued as they shared dessert, a single flan with 2 spoons, their ideas bouncing off each other with increasing excitement. By the time they left the restaurant, Carol had almost forgotten the vast economic divide between them. Almost. Reality crashed back as they approached her apartment building, a stark contrast to Ayan's elegant home with its manicured grounds and fountain. She felt a familiar knot of embarrassment form in her stomach. "This is me," she said, as he pulled up to the curb. Ayan looked at the building, his expression unreadable. "I'll walk you to your door." "That is not necessary." "Carol," he interrupted gently, "I'd like to walk you to your door." The knot in her stomach tightened. "It is not exactly the Spanish mansion you were used to." "Good," he replied simply. "I get tired of fountains." His deadpan delivery startled a laugh out of her, breaking the tension. "Well, you're in luck. Our fountain is currently out of order. Permanently." As they climbed the stairs to her 3rd-floor apartment, Carol braced herself for the inevitable. A judgment, the subtle shift in expression she'd seen countless times when people realized just how modestly she lived. But when they reached her door, decorated with a hand-painted sea turtle she'd created during her freshman year, Ayan's focus was entirely on her. "I had a wonderful time tonight," he said, his voice low. "So did I," Carol admitted, fumbling for her keys to distract from the sudden flutter in her chest. "Thanks for the art consultation." Is that what it was? His eyes, those remarkable amber eyes, held hers. Carol swallowed. "What would you call it?" The beginning," Ayan said simply, and then he was leaning in, his hand cupping her cheek with a gentleness that made her breath catch. His kiss was light, questioning, a hypothesis rather than a conclusion. When he pulled back, his expression was so vulnerable that Carol felt something inside her shift, like tectonic plates rearranging her emotional landscape. "Was that okay?" he asked. Instead of answering, Carol rose on her tiptoes and kissed him back, no longer a hypothesis, but a definitive statement. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. When they finally broke apart, Carol's head was spinning, from the kiss, from the sangria, from the impossibility of what was happening. "And I should go," Ayan said reluctantly, "but I'd like to see you again." "I'd like that too," Carol replied, before her practical side could object. As he turned to leave, Carol impulsively grabbed his hand. "Wait, would you like to meet Nina?" Ayan's smile was answer enough. Inside her small apartment, Carol was acutely aware of how different it was from Ayan's world. The second-hand furniture, the art supplies crowding every surface, the makeshift studio she'd created in what should have been the dining area. But Ayan did not seem to notice, his attention captured by the large tank where Nina the turtle was paddling contentedly. "She's magnificent," he declared, crouching to get a better look. "She knows it too," Carol said, kneeling beside him. Total diva. As they watched Nina swim, their shoulders touching, Carol felt a strange sense of rightness, as if the universe had momentarily aligned, bringing together elements that shouldn't work, but somehow did. "Carol," Ayan said softly, his eyes still on the turtle. "I know this is fast, and I know our worlds are very different, but I cannot stop thinking about you." "I cannot stop thinking about you either," she admitted. "But Ayan, I am not sure." A key rattled in the lock, and the front door swung open to reveal Carol's father and stepmother, returning earlier than expected from their dinner out. They froze at the sight of Ayan, expressions cycling rapidly, from surprise to curiosity to, in her stepmother's case, calculation. "Dad, Diane, this is Elaine Stanfield," Carol introduced, rising quickly. "Ayan, my father, Robert Hollister, and my stepmother, Diane." "The Stanfield?" Diane asked, eyebrows rising as she took in Ayan's casual but clearly expensive clothing. "Of Stanfield Educational Systems." Ayan nodded politely. "It's a pleasure to meet you both." Robert extended his hand. "So you the reason." "My daughter has been walking on air this past week." "Dad!" Carol protested, her cheeks warming. "I certainly hope so," Ayan replied smoothly, shaking Robert's hand. "Your daughter is quite remarkable." Diane's entire demeanor had transformed, her usual cool disdain replaced by an almost aggressive hospitality. "One do you stay?" "For coffee, Mr. Stanfield?" "Thank you, but I should be going. I have an early meeting tomorrow." Ayan turned to Carol. "I'll call you?" "Okay," she managed, walking him to the door. In the hallway, safely out of her parents' earshot, Ayan took both her hands in his. "I'm sorry if that was awkward." "It wasn't your fault," Carol assured him. "Though you should prepare yourself. My stepmother will probably send you a friend request before you reach your car." Ayan laughed. "I'll survive." His expression grew serious. "What were you going to say earlier, before your parents arrived?" Carol hesitated. This is complicated, right? You and I me, and those are pretty different." "Things. Are they?" Ayan asked, "because tonight felt pretty simple to me." He squeezed her hands gently. "Just think about it, okay? No pressure." Damn. As she watched him walk away, Carol couldn't help but wonder if fairy tales sometimes did come true, and if they did, what was the catch? Inside, her stepmother was waiting, practically vibrating with excitement. "Carol Hollister, you... have you been holding out on us? Ayan Stanfield is one of the most eligible bachelors in Central California. His company is worth millions." "We just went to an art exhibition," Carol said defensively. "He seems nice," her father offered, earning a glare from Diane. "Nice, Robert, he's a Stanfield. Do you have any idea the doors this could open?" "Carol, I need to go to bed," Carol interrupted firmly. "Good night." In her tiny bedroom, Carol collapsed onto her bed, her mind replaying the evening, the art, the conversation, the kiss. Especially the kiss. Her phone pinged with a text. "Thank you for introducing me to Nina. She is exquisite, much like her owner. Sleep well, Carol." As she drifted off to sleep, Carol tried to ignore the warning voice in her head, the one reminding her that Cinderella's coach always turned back into a pumpkin at midnight. But for the first time in years, another voice was louder. What if this time it doesn't tea? 3 weeks later, Carol sat cross-legged on the floor of her makeshift studio, surrounded by canvases in various stages of completion. Classical music drifted from her second-hand speakers. Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, Ayan's recommendation. She'd never been much for classical music before, but there was something about the lone cello that spoke to her current creative state. Singular, focused, unexpectedly emotional. Her phone chimed with a text, and Carol smiled reflexively, knowing without looking who it was. "Found this and thought of you. Dinner tonight, I'll cook." Attached was a photo of a small bronze turtle sculpture, exquisitely detailed and obviously antique. "Only if you promise not to cook that paella again. My taste buds are still in therapy. Dinner sounds great." His response came immediately. "That hurts, Hollister, but fair. Pizza it is." Carol set down her phone, trying to focus on the canvas before her, but her mind kept drifting. The past 3 weeks had been surreal, a whirlwind of gallery visits, late-night conversations, shared meals, and increasingly difficult-to-ignore feelings. Ayan had seamlessly integrated himself into her life, seemingly unbothered by the economic chasm between them. When she'd finally gathered the courage to show him her portfolio, his response had been so genuinely enthusiastic that she'd almost cried. He didn't just look, he saw, asking questions that demonstrated real engagement with her artistic intentions, challenging her when he didn't understand a choice, praising elements that others had overlooked. Equally surprising was how willingly he stepped into her world. He seemed genuinely comfortable in her cramped apartment, befriending Nina, charming her father, and even managing to establish a fragile détente with Diane, whose initial social climbing enthusiasm had cooled when she realized Ayan wasn't interested in her connections or approval. But despite these promising signs, Carol couldn't quite silence the voice of doubt. Their differences weren't just financial. They were cultural, experiential, fundamental. Ayan had grown up with every advantage while she'd been stretching dollars since childhood. He'd attended prestigious private schools. She'd fought her way through public education. He moved through the world with the easy confidence of someone who never had doors closed in his face. And then there was his family. While Elaine had been nothing but warm, treating Carol like a welcomed addition rather than an interloper, Zara remained coolly polite, her academic eyes assessing Carol with barely concealed skepticism. Even Jeffries, the butler, seemed to view her with a mixture of curiosity and concern, as if she were a volatile element introduced into a carefully balanced equation. The only one who embraced her without reservation was Mrs. Chen, the Stanfield's cook, who had taken one look at Carol's spire's too-thin frame and declared it her personal mission to put some meat on those artist bones. A knock at her apartment. Doctor pulled Carol from her ruminations. She wasn't expecting anyone, and Ayan was in meetings all day, which meant it was probably Diane, forgetting her keys again. But when she opened the door, it wasn't her stepmother standing in the hallway. It was Zara Stanfield. "May I come in?" she asked, her expression unreadable. Too surprised to refuse, Carol stepped aside. "Of course." Zara entered, her gaze sweeping the small apartment with clinical precision. She was dressed simply in jeans and a blouse, but something about her posture, the straight spine, the precisely placed steps, screamed expensive education and carefully cultivated poise. "I apologize for dropping by unannounced," Zara said, turning to face Carol. "But I thought it was time we had a conversation." Carol's stomach tightened. "About?" "My brother, obviously." Zara moved to the window, looking out at the decidedly unimpressive view. "He's quite taken with you." "The feeling is mutual," Carol said carefully. Zara nodded, as if confirming a hypothesis. "I am sure it is. Ayan has many admirable qualities." She turned, fixing Carol with those familiar amber eyes. "He also has responsibilities, expectations, a legacy to uphold. I am aware." "Are you?" Zara's tone was not unkind, merely skeptical. "Do you know that after our father died, Ayan put his own dreams on hold to ensure the company survived? That he works 18-hour days to maintain what our parents built? That there are thousands of students whose educational futures depend on his business acumen?" Carol felt her defenses rising. I know he works hard. I know education is his passion. Passion isn't tea enough, Zara said, shaking her head. The Stanfield name carries weight in this community, weight that opens doors, secures funding, maintains relationships. These are delicate ecosystems that require certain kinds of people to navigate them successfully. The implication hung in the air between them. Certain kinds of people, not art students from community college with second-hand furniture and maxed-out credit cards. Oh, so I am not the right kind of person, Carol stated flatly. Is that what you came here to tell me? Zara sighed, some of her clinical detachment softening. I came to make sure you understand what you're getting into. My brother is... When Ayan commits to something, he gives everything. His heart, his time, his resources. It is what makes him exceptional at business, but it also makes him vulnerable. You think I'd hurt him? Not intentionally. Zara moved closer, her expression earnest. But eventually, the novelty of different worlds colliding wears off. Reality sets in. Incompatibilities become impossible to ignore. Carol crossed her arms, trying to contain the hurt spreading through her chest. You've given this a lot of thought. I love my brother, Zara said simply. I've watched him sacrifice his own happiness for years. I don't want to see him invest in another losing venture. The words stung like a slap. Another losing venture. Is that how the Stanfields saw her? As some kind of risky investment? I think you should go, Carol said quietly. Zara nodded, reaching for her purse, but at the door she paused. Just think about what Ivy said. If you care about Ayan as much as he seems to care about you, consider whether what you're offering is worth what he'd be giving up. After Zara left, Carol sank onto the couch, Nina's tank bubbling softly in the background. The turtle swam lazily in circles, blissfully unaware of her owner's turmoil. What do you think, Nina? Carol asked. Is Zara right? Are Ayan and I kidding ourselves? Nina, unsurprisingly, offered no opinion. Carol picked up her phone, staring at Ayan's last message. It would be so easy to cancel tonight, to create distance, to protect herself from what increasingly felt like inevitable heartbreak. Because no matter how genuinely Ayan cared, no matter how seamlessly he seemed to fit into her world, Zara wasn't entirely wrong. They came from different places, with different expectations and different futures laid out before them. What could she possibly offer that would be worth what he might have to sacrifice? With trembling fingers, Carol typed, "Actually, can we rain check tonight? Not feeling great." Ayan's response came quickly. "Of course, need anything? I can bring soup, medicine, terrible movies. Just rest, I think. Talk tomorrow? Feel better, cello girl. I'll miss you tonight." Carol set her phone down, tears stinging her eyes. Cello girl, his nickname for her after discovering her secret. Love for the instrument she'd never been able to afford to play. How did someone walk away from a man who could hear the music in her before she recognized it herself? But Zara's words echoed in her mind. If you care about Ayan as much as he seems to care about you, consider whether what you offering is worth what he'd be giving up. What was she offering? Art? Love? A life of divided loyalties and strained family relationships? Carol turned back to her canvas, picking up her brush. When she couldn't make sense of her thoughts, she could at least make sense of her art. The piece before her, originally intended as a study of contrasting textures, transformed under her hands, evolving into something unexpected. Hours passed. As she worked, applying layer after layer, building a visual representation of the conflict raging inside her. It was after midnight when her phone rang. Ayan. "Hello?" she answered, concern immediately overriding her emotional turmoil. He never called this late. "I know you're not feeling well. Ayan said, his voice tight with an emotion she couldn't identify. "But I need to see you. Can I come over?" "Now. It is after midnight. Please, Carol." Something in his tone, a vulnerability Adi never heard before, made her hesitate only briefly. "Okay." 20 minutes later, a knock at her door revealed Ayan, still dressed in his business suit, but with the tie loosened and the top button undone. His hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. "What is wrong?" Carol asked, immediately concerned. "Is it your mother, Zara?" "They fine," Ayan said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Everyone's fine." "Then what?" "My sister came to see you today," he interrupted, his amber eyes intense. Carol felt the blood drain from her face. "How did you know that?" "Jeffries. He drove her. He was worried about what she might say, so he told me." "Your butler reports on your sister E.S. activities." A hint of a smile touched Ayan E.S. lips. "Jeffries has been with our family since I was born. He is more concerned with our happiness than our privacy." The almost smile faded. "What did Zara say to you?" Carol moved to the couch, buying time. Nothing terrible, just concerns. About us, about the future. Specifically that I might not be equipped to handle the responsibilities that come with being part of your world. That our differences might eventually become too much to overcome. That I am not the right kind of person. Ayan's jaw tightened. "I am going to kill her." "Don T," Carol said quickly. "She loves you. She is trying to protect you." "I don't need protection." Ayan crossed the room, kneeling before her. "Especially not from you." The raw emotion in his voice made Carol's throat tighten. "Maybe you do. Maybe she's right, Ayan. We come from such different places. Your world, the galas, the board meetings, the expectations. I don't know if I'll ever fit into that." "Then we'll build a new world," he said simply, taking her hands in his. "One where we both fit." "Is it really that simple?" "No," Ayan admitted. "It will be hard and complicated and messy. There will be days when our differences seem insurmountable. But Carol..." He reached up, cupping her cheek. "Every relationship faces challenges. Ours just happened to involve different bank accounts and family expectations, rather than snoring or toothpaste cap disagreements." Despite herself, Carol smiled. "You probably don't even squeeze the toothpaste from the middle like a heathen." "Actually, I do. Drives Jeffries insane." They laughed together, the tension easing slightly. But as their laughter faded, Carol's doubts resurfaced. "I cancelled tonight because I was scared," she admitted. "Not of your sister, but of myself. Of how much She swallowed hard. "Of how much I've become to care for you. It would be so easy to lose myself in your world, to become a footnote in the Elaine Stanfield story, rather than the author of my own." Ayan's expression softened with understanding. "Is that what you think I want? For you to become a supporting character?" He shook his head. "I fell for the artist who helped my mother at the theatre, the woman who named her turtle Nina and defends her creative choices with passion, the Carol Hollister who is writing her own story, one I just hope to be a part of." His words wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket on a cold night, but still a final doubt lingered. "And your family? Your mother, your sister, Jeffries? What if they never accept me? My mother already adores you. Jeffries is clearly on your side if he is ratting out Zara. And as for my sister..." Ayan smiled ruefully. "Zara is brilliant but stubborn. She'll come around when she sees how happy we are. If she doesn't, that is her loss." "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple," Ayan insisted. "Not easy, but simple." He took her hands again. "Carol Hollister, I'm completely, ridiculously in love with you. Everything else is just details." The declaration hung in the air between them, unexpected and undeniable. Carol felt the world tilt on its axis, everything shifting into a new orientation around those words. "You love me?" she whispered. "Is that so hard to believe?" "Kind of, yeah." Ayan laughed softly. "Well, believe it. I love your creativity, your determination, your kindness. I love that you help elderly, women in theatres and name turtles after opera singers. I love that you see beauty in unexpected places and challenge me to see it too." His voice dropped lower. "I love you, Carol, and I hope you might love me too." Carol felt the truth rising within her, a truth she had been fighting for weeks, afraid of its power, its potential to hurt her. But in that moment, with Ayan kneeling before her, his heart laid bare, she could not deny it any longer. "I do," she admitted. "I love you, Ayan, and it terrifies me." "Good," he said, pulling her into his arms. "That means it matters." As their lips met, Carol felt something settle inside her. Not the elimination of doubt or fear, but the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Different worlds, colliding and creating something entirely new. And for now, that was enough. The Stanfield Educational Foundation's annual gala was the social event of the season in Fresno, a night when the wealthiest and most influential members of the community gathered to support educational initiatives while showing off designer gowns and custom tuxedos. It was also, Carol realized, as she stared at her reflection in the full-length mirror of Ayan's guest suite, the most terrifying night of her life. "You look beautiful," Elaine said, appearing in the doorway. She was resplendent in a deep blue gown, her silver hair arranged in an elegant updo adorned with sapphires. Carol smoothed her hands over the emerald green silk of her own dress, a vintage find that she and Elaine had discovered during an unexpected bonding afternoon of shopping. The older woman had insisted on buying it, calling it a welcome to, the family gift that had brought tears to Carol's eyes. "I am not sure I am ready for this," Carol admitted. "No one ever is," Elaine said, coming to stand beside her. "My first gala as Mrs. Stanfield, I hid in the coat closet for 20 minutes before my husband found me." Carol stared at her in disbelief. "You? But you were so poised, confident," Elaine laughed. "My dear, that came with time, and a very patient partner who reminded me that I belonged wherever I chose to be." She reached out, adjusting one of Carol's curls. "Sound familiar?" It did. Over the past 2 months, Ayan had been endlessly patient as Carol navigated the unfamiliar terrain of his world. For every intimidating business dinner or social obligation, he created a counterbalance. Art supply shopping in her favorite second-hand stores, Saturday mornings at farmers' markets, lazy Sundays with Nina and takeout. "What if I embarrass him?" Carol asked, voicing her deepest fear. All those people downstairs, they were expecting Ayan Stanfield's girlfriend to be someone else. "Then they will be pleasantly surprised," Elaine said firmly. "Besides, most of them are simply curious. The notorious workaholic has finally found someone worth leaving the office for. That is practically a miracle in their eyes." Carol smiled, despite her nerves. It was true that Ayan's schedule had shifted dramatically since they met. He still worked long hours, but he delegated more, restructured meetings, and somehow carved out time that hadn't existed before. A soft knock at the door preceded Zara's entrance. Unlike her mother, who had embraced Carol from the start, Zara had maintained a careful distance, civil but reserved. Tonight, however, she seemed different, less armored somehow. "Everyone's arriving," she announced, then hesitated. "Carol, you look lovely." The simple compliment felt like a peace offering. "Thank you, so do you." Zara nodded, acknowledging the reciprocal olive branch. "Mother, the Wilsons are asking for you, something about the silent auction." "Oh dear, I'd better go." Elaine said, heading for the door. "Carol, take your time. Ayan will come find you when you're ready." "Deal." As Elaine departed, an awkward silence descended between Carol and Zara. They hadn't spoken directly about Zara's visit to Carol's apartment, though Ayan had mentioned that he and his sister had engaged in what he termed a spirited discussion about boundaries and respect. "I owe you an apology," Zara said finally, her formal tone at odds with the vulnerability in her expression. "My approach that day was misguided." Carol waited, sensing there was more. "I've watched my brother assume enormous responsibilities since we were teenagers," Zara continued. "He gave up his own dreams to ensure mine could continue. I thought I was protecting him, but—" She squared her shoulders. "I was wrong. About you, about what Ayan needs." "Thank you for saying that," Carol said sincerely. "It means a lot." Zara nodded, then added with a hint of her usual precision, "That doesn't mean this one to be challenging. The world you are re-entering tonight can be cutthroat beneath the philanthropy and champagne." "I am tougher than I look," Carol assured her. "I am beginning to see that," Zara acknowledged, then glanced at her watch. "I should join Mother. Ayan asked me to tell you he'll meet you at the top of the stairs in 5 minutes. After Zara departed, Carol took a final look in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was both familiar and strange. The same Carol Hollister who rode the bus to art classes and bargain hunted for supplies, now wrapped in silk and preparing to face Fresno S Elite on the arm of Elaine Stanfield. 5 minutes later, Carol found Ayan waiting as promised at the top of the grand staircase that descended to the main hall where the gala was being held. He was breathtaking in his tuxedo, the formal attire accentuating his lean strength and natural elegance. When he saw her, his face transformed with a smile that still, after all these weeks, made her heart skip. "You are a vision," he said, taking her hands and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You were not so bad yourself," Carol replied, her nerves easing at his familiar touch. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. Carol took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." As they began their descent, conversations below gradually quieted, heads turning to watch their progress. Carol felt the weight of dozens of curious stares, assessment in every glance. "Everyone else looking," she whispered. "Of course they are," Ayan murmured. "You're the most beautiful woman in the room. That is not why they were staring, and you know it." "True," Ayan conceded. They were wondering who captured the heart of Fresno as most confirmed bachelor. His grip on her hand tightened reassuringly. "Let them wonder." At the bottom of the stairs, they were immediately surrounded. Carol quickly lost track of names and faces as Ayan introduced her to board members, donors, and community leaders. She smiled and nodded, trying to remember the etiquette tips Elaine had shared, grateful for Ayan's steadying presence. "And this is Carol Hollister," Ayan was saying to yet another couple in expensive evening wear. "A talented artist whose work will be featured in our new educational center, S Gallery." Carol nearly choked on her champagne. "What?" Ayan's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Did I forget to mention that? The board approved the proposal this morning. We were dedicating a permanent exhibition space to emerging local artists, with you as our inaugural featured artist." Indeed, before Carol could process this information, they were approached by an elegant woman in her 60s. "Ayan, darling, aren't you going to introduce me to your girlfriend?" "Of course," Ayan said smoothly. "Margaret Wilson, meet Carol Hollister. Carol, Margaret is our foundation's largest donor and my godmother." "So you are the one who managed what none of us could," Margaret said, eyeing Carol with frank curiosity. "Getting this workaholic to actually leave his office before midnight." "I can take much credit," Carol replied. "He still works ridiculous hours." But now he has something to come home for, Margaret observed shrewdly. Tell me, Miss Hollister, what do you do when you are not reforming workaholics? I am an artist, Carol said. Mixed media, primarily. Margaret's eyebrows rose. An artist? How refreshing. This crowd could use more creative minds and fewer financial ones. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. Between us, most of these people wouldn't recognize true artistic talent if it painted them a Mona Lisa. Carol found herself warming to Margaret's directness. I take it you're a patron of the arts. Among other things, Margaret said vaguely. I do find that artistic sensibilities bring a necessary perspective to educational initiatives, something your young man understands better than most of our board members. Before Carol could respond, Ayan was pulled away by a group of donors, leaving her alone with Margaret. Rather than feeling abandoned, however, Carol found herself engaged in a surprisingly enjoyable conversation about the role of arts in education, with Margaret offering sharp insights and genuine interest in Carol's perspective. You must come to my gallery opening next month, Margaret concluded. Bring Ayan, of course, though I suspect he might be a lost cause when it comes to contemporary installations. He.s. learning, Carol defended with a smile. As the evening progressed, Carol found her initial terror fading. Yes, there were curious stares and the occasional whispered comment, but there were also genuine connections, people who seemed interested in her thoughts on education and art, who didn't dismiss her because she lacked their pedigree or bank account. Midway through the evening, Carol excused herself to find the restroom, grateful for a moment alone to process the whirlwind of impressions. As she was returning to the main hall, she overheard voices from a partially open door. Udam, quite the statement, bringing her tonight, and a male voice was saying. I mean, she's lovely, but hardly what we expected for the Stanfield heir. Did you see her dress? Vintage, obviously, a female voice replied, and not in the intentional way. Elaine seems to have taken her under her wing, though, a third voice added, and you know Elaine doesn't suffer fools. Perhaps there's more to the girl than meets the eye. Or perhaps Ayan is finally rebelling against family expectations, the male voice suggested, a phase before he settles down with someone suitable. Carol felt as if she had been doused in ice water. This was exactly what she feared, being seen as a temporary diversion, a phase that would pass once Ayan tired of slumming it with an art student. There you are! Ayan's voice came from behind her, startling her. I've been looking everywhere. He stopped, noticing her expression. What else wrong? Carol hesitated, then nodded toward the partially open door where the conversation continued, now shifted to speculation about how long the relationship would last before reality set in. Ayan's face hardened as he caught snatches of the discussion. Without a word, he strode to the door and pushed it open, revealing 3 startled gala attendees, a middle-aged couple and a younger man, caught mid-gossip. Richard, Cynthia, Thomas. Ayan greeted them, his voice deceptively pleasant. I see you've been discussing my personal life. How fascinating that you have such detailed insights into my relationship. The trio had the grace to look embarrassed, though the woman, Cynthia, attempted recovery. Ayan dear, we were just saying how lovely your date is. My partner, Ayan corrected, emphasizing the word. And yes, Carol is lovely. She is also brilliant, talented, and the reason our foundation is launching a new arts initiative that I am preparing to announce tonight. He stepped aside, revealing Carol in the doorway. Perhaps you'd like to continue your character assessment to her face. The mortified silence that followed was broken only when Carol stepped forward, offering her hand to the stunned group. It's a pleasure to meet you. I believe you were just getting to the part where you decide I'm a gold digger, or was it a phase? I came in mid-conversation. The younger man, Thomas, turned scarlet. "Ms. Hollister, we apologize for—" "For getting caught?" Ayan suggested coolly. "Don't worry. Your generous donations to the foundation will continue to be welcomed. Your presence at future events, however, might be reconsidered." As Ayan guided Carol away, she felt a strange mixture of humiliation and triumph. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured. "Yes, I did," Ayan replied, his jaw still tight with anger. "And no one speaks about you that way. Not in my house, not at my event, not ever." Carol squeezed his arm, touched by his fierce protectiveness, but also troubled by the confrontation. "There will always be people who think I'm not good enough. For you," she said quietly. "We can challenge every one of them." "Watch me," Ayan replied, but his expression softened as he looked at her. "But I'm sorry you had to hear that." "I am not," Carol said, surprising herself with the realization. "It is better to know what we refacing." Ayan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You're right, but what they think doesn't matter. What matters is this, us." As they rejoined the gala, Carol felt a new resolve forming. She'd spent weeks worrying about fitting into Ayan's world, about being judged and found wanting. But perhaps the point wasn't to fit into an existing space, but to create a new one shaped by both their visions, both their strengths. When it came time for Ayan's speech, Carol stood beside Elaine and Zara, watching with pride as he addressed the crowd with natural authority and passion. He spoke about the Foundation's achievements and goals, about the transformative power of education, and finally about the new arts initiative. "Art teaches us to see differently," Ayan said, his gaze finding Carol in the crowd. "It challenges our perspectives, expands our understanding of what's possible. Our new community arts program, led by emerging local artist Carol Hollister, will bring that vision to our educational centers, ensuring that students from all backgrounds have access to not just academic knowledge, but creative inspiration." The applause that followed was enthusiastic, though Carol barely registered it through her shock. Led by her? When had that been decided? As the formal part of the evening concluded, Ayan found her, his expression a mix of hope and apprehension. "And I should have discussed it with you first," he admitted. "The leadership position, it was presumptuous." Extremely," Carol agreed, though she could suppress her smile, "but also perfect." "Really? Really? It is exactly what I wanted to do. Create accessible art spaces, especially for students. Though you might have mentioned it before announcing it to all of Fresno's elite." Ayan laughed, pulling her into his arms despite the public setting. "I meant it as a surprise, but I see now that might not have been the best approach." "You think?" Carol teased, then grew serious. "Ayan, are you sure about this, about me? There will always be people like those gossips, people who think I am not the right choice for you." "Let me be very clear," Ayan said, his amber eyes intense. "You, Carol Hollister, are the only choice for me. The only future I want, the only home I need." He took a deep breath. "Which brings me to another surprise, one I was planning for a more private moment, but now seems right." Before Carol could process what was happening, Ayan was reaching into his pocket and dropping to one knee right there in the middle of the gala. Conversations around them stuttered to a halt as guests realized what was happening. "Carol Hollister," Ayan said, his voice steady despite the public setting. "I love you. Your creativity, your kindness, your strength. I love the way you see the world and the way you've helped me see it too. I don't care what anyone thinks or expects. I only care about building a life with you." He opened a small velvet box, revealing a ring unlike any Carol had seen. Not a traditional diamond, but an antique emerald surrounded by tiny pearls. "Will you marry me?" Time seemed to suspend as Carol stared at the man kneeling before her, this brilliant, kind, complicated man who had crashed into her life at a community theatre and turned everything upside down in the most wonderful way. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." As Ayan slid the ring onto her finger, the crowd around them erupted in applause, led, Carol noted with amusement, by a beaming Elaine, a surprisingly emotional Zara, and a vigorously approving Margaret Wilson. When Ayan rose to kiss her, Carol felt as if they were the only two people in the room, in the world. Different backgrounds, different experiences, same heart. "I love you," she murmured against his lips. "And I love you," he replied, "always." Epilogue. 1 year later, the Stanfield Community Arts Center opened its doors to the public. Located in a renovated warehouse in one of Fresno's underserved neighborhoods, the center featured exhibition spaces, studios, classrooms, and a special habitat for Nina the turtle, who had become something of a mascot for the project. Carol stood in the center of the main gallery, surrounded by the work of local artists, professionals and students alike, displayed with equal prominence and respect. The opening exhibition, titled Worlds Colliding, showcased art that bridged different techniques, cultures and perspectives. "Nervous?" Ayan asked, appearing at her side. Though he wore a suit for the opening, his tie was already loosened, a concession to comfort that made Carol smile. "Terrified," she admitted, "but the good kind of terrified. The daikon to believe this is actually happening kind." Ayan slipped his arm around her waist, his wedding band catching the gallery lights. "Believe it. You made this happen." We made it happen," Carol corrected, leaning into him. "All of us." And it was true. The Arts Center had become a family project in the truest sense. Elaine had leveraged her connections in the arts community to secure donations and mentorship programs. Zara had designed innovative educational curricula that integrated artistic expression with academic subjects. Even Jeffries had contributed, organizing a volunteer program that brought retirees into the center to share their skills and stories. Carol's father had surprised everyone by taking woodworking classes and then offering to teach them at the center, while her stepmother, after initial skepticism, had found her niche organizing fundraising events with an efficiency that impressed. Even Zara, the center had become a bridge not just between art and education, but between worlds that might otherwise never have intersected. Wealthy donors and struggling students, established artists and tentative beginners, the Stanfield legacy and Carol Tass's vision for accessible creativity. Mrs. Stanfield, a young girl, no more than 12, approached Carol hesitantly. "I wanted to show you my drawing. It's for the student exhibition next month." Carol knelt to examine the girl's sketchbook. "This is beautiful, Lucia. I love how you've combined these different styles." "My art teacher says I should stick to one technique until I master it," Lucia said uncertainly. "But I like mixing them." "Then mix them," Carol encouraged. "Art isn't a tea about following rules. It's about creating your own." As Lucia skipped away, clutching her sketchbook with new confidence, Ayan squeezed Carol's shoulder. "You were good at this, the mentoring part." "But I had excellent role models," Carol replied, thinking of her professors, of Elaine's quiet guidance, even of Zara's challenging perspectives. The gallery was filling up now. Community members, students from Stanfield educational centers, local artists, and yes, some of Fresno's elite, here to support the Foundation's newest initiative. The disparate groups mingled with growing ease, finding common ground in their appreciation for the art surrounding them. Carol caught sight of Mrs. Chen serving her famous dumplings at the refreshment table, Jeffries helping an elderly visitor find a seat, and Elaine deep in conversation with a group of art students. Near the entrance, Her father was proudly showing off the custom frames he built for the exhibition, while Diane charmed potential donors with practiced ease. And there, by the turtle habitat, Zara was explaining something to a cluster of fascinated children, her academic precision softened by genuine enthusiasm. She caught Carol Chair's eye and raised her glass in a small salute. "A penny for your thoughts," Ayan murmured in Carol Chair's ear. "I was just thinking about that night at the theater," Carol said, turning to face him. "How differently things might have turned out if I hadn't offered to help your mother." "I'd like to think we would have found each other anyway," Ayan replied. "Some collisions are inevitable." "Spoken like a true romantic," Carol teased. "You've ruined me," Ayan admitted with a grin. "I used to be all spreadsheets and strategic planning. Now I am quoting poetry in board meetings." The horror. As they laughed together, Carol felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Not the fairy tale ending she'd once feared was too good to be true, but something better, a real beginning, with challenges and compromises and the occasional clash of worlds, but also with love and purpose and the joy of creating something meaningful together. Their story hadn't ended with a glass slipper or a royal ball. It had started there, at a community theatre, with an act of kindness, and continued into a future they were building day by day, brushstroke by brushstroke, different backgrounds, different experiences, same heart, and a shared canvas just waiting for the next chapter to be painted. As the evening continued around them, Carol and Ayan stood together in the gallery they created. Not just a physical space, but a bridge between their worlds. And in that moment, surrounded by art and family and possibility, Carol knew that some fairy tales didn't end at midnight after all. Sometimes that was where they truly began,